It was a bright afternoon in Los Angeles, the kind that made the city feel alive. Barron Trump, now in his late teens, had spent his morning in quiet reflection, reading at home. Craving a peaceful lunch, he decided to visit La Terrace, a high-end restaurant known for its elegance and elite clientele, where CEOs, celebrities, and influencers dined in hushed luxury. Barron had been here before, always appreciating the refined atmosphere. But today, as he walked through the glass doors, something was different. His red MAGA hat sat firmly on his head, a symbol he wore naturally, without aggression, just as part of his identity. The hostess, a woman in her mid-30s, greeted him with professional warmth and led him to a table near the corner. The restaurant wasn't crowded, just a few patrons sipping wine and murmuring in low voices. Barron settled in, opened the menu, and began scanning for his favorite dish. At first, he didn't notice the eyes on him. A man at the next table nudged his companion. Two waiters whispered near the bar. The energy in the room shifted. Then, from across the floor, the manager appeared. A sharp-suited man in his 40s, his expression unreadable. He walked straight toward Barron's table with a purposeful stride. "Excuse me," the manager said, his voice carrying just enough volume to turn heads. "We have a policy against political apparel here. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat." Barron looked up, mildly surprised but unshaken. He calmly removed his earbuds, setting them on the table. "I wasn't aware of any policy like that," he replied, his tone even and respectful. "It's in our code of conduct," the manager insisted, gesturing vaguely toward the entrance. "We aim to keep this space neutral for all guests." Barron paused, observing the growing tension. Some diners pretended not to listen, while others stared more openly. "I'm not looking for trouble," he said, his voice measured. "I just want to eat my lunch." The manager's posture stiffened. The air in the restaurant grew heavier. Some guests exchanged glances, sensing that something larger was unfolding. Would Barron stand his ground, or would he comply and avoid confrontation? Barron paused for a moment, his expression unreadable. He took a deep breath. Then, with a slight nod, he pushed his chair back and stood up. Without hesitation, he gathered his belongings and turned toward the exit. The restaurant fell into an awkward silence as he walked away, leaving behind his untouched glass of water. The door closed softly behind him, but the tension inside lingered, thick and heavy. Outside, the warm California breeze brushed against his face. He stopped for a second, adjusting his red MAGA hat slightly, as if reaffirming his choice to wear it. He wasn't angry, but frustration settled deep within him. More than anything, he felt disappointed. He had been raised to treat people with kindness, even when differences arose, and today it felt like that principle had been cast aside. Inside the restaurant, quiet murmurs spread from table to table. A waiter hesitated before leaning toward the manager, whispering a question about whether that had been the right decision. The manager simply waved him off, confident in his choice. He believed rules were rules, and making exceptions would send the wrong message. To him, this was his restaurant, and he would run it as he saw fit. Barron continued walking, letting the sounds of the city surround him. A few blocks away, he spotted a small public park and decided to sit on an empty bench. He pulled out his phone, first messaging his mother to let her know what had happened, then reaching out to a few close friends. He wasn't searching for sympathy, only clarity. Had he been wrong? Was the manager justified? Within minutes, responses flooded in. Some friends were outraged, calling the situation unfair, while others assured him he had handled it better than they would have. He scrolled through the messages, his mind turning over the events of the last hour. He wasn't interested in revenge or making a scene, but as he sat there, a new idea began to form. Barron saw an opportunity to turn the situation into something constructive, something that could foster understanding rather than division. If the restaurant wanted to avoid political statements, why not highlight the importance of unity instead? The thought settled in his mind, solidifying into something bigger. He stood up, determination flickering in his eyes, and pulled out his phone. Without hesitation, he started making calls, his voice calm but filled with purpose. This wasn't about retaliation, it was about creating a conversation that mattered. Back at the restaurant, the atmosphere remained uneasy. Word of what had happened spread quickly through social media as diners who had witnessed the moment shared their accounts online. A blurry photo of Barron leaving the restaurant surfaced, with a caption questioning whether he had been kicked out just for wearing a hat. Comments flooded in, some supporting the restaurant's decision, others criticizing it as an attack on freedom of expression. The manager, scrolling through his phone at the bar, felt his stomach tighten. He had expected minor pushback, but this was growing faster than he anticipated. He muttered to himself, trying to brush off the unease, but deep down, he knew the situation was starting to spiral. By the time Barron returned home, the incident had already gained momentum online. Local influencers had picked up the story, some defending him, others arguing about the larger implications. He glanced at the posts briefly but didn't let them consume his focus. He wasn't interested in fueling outrage or deepening the divide. Instead, he wanted to shift the conversation into something positive, something that would actually make a difference. Sitting at his desk, he flipped open a small leather-bound notebook and started jotting down ideas. He thought about everything that had happened that day, not just the exchange with the manager, but the silent reactions of the people around him, the stares, the whispered conversations, the unspoken judgments. He didn't want to create more conflict. He wanted to start a real dialogue. Barron's vision became clearer, an event that wouldn't just respond to the situation but would bring people together. He wanted to support underprivileged communities while also creating a space for open conversation and understanding. This wasn't about proving a point, it was about showing that unity could emerge even from moments of division. Without wasting time, he picked up his phone and made a call. He introduced himself and got straight to the point. He needed advice on organizing a charity event, and he needed it fast. The person on the other end seemed surprised but quickly agreed to meet. By the time the evening settled in, Barron's plan was already in motion. He sat down and drafted a proposal, carefully mapping out how the fundraiser would work. The location was key, right outside LA Terrace. He wanted the event to serve as a statement that, even where conflict had occurred, understanding could take root. A close friend stepped in to help coordinate logistics, and within hours, the framework of the event was set. Calls were made, volunteers were gathered, and momentum started building. Meanwhile, back at the restaurant, the situation was unraveling. What had started as a private decision by the manager had now spilled into a public debate. News outlets picked up the story, quoting eyewitnesses and dissecting every angle. Some articles portrayed Barron as a victim of intolerance, while others defended the restaurant's right to enforce its policies. Social media erupted, comments flooded in, splitting opinions. Some users praised the manager, insisting that businesses had the right to control their atmosphere, but others called for boycotts, accusing the restaurant of hypocrisy. One comment stood out: "So much for a neutral space. Kicking someone out isn't neutral, it's picking a side." Inside LA Terrace, the tension was impossible to ignore. Reservations were being canceled. Regular customers weren't showing up. The once lively dining room felt strangely quiet. The manager, who had stood by his decision with confidence, now felt uncertainty creeping in. He told himself this would pass, that it would all blow over soon. As night fell, Barron prepared for what was to come. He knew the fundraiser wouldn't erase the incident, but he hoped it could shift the focus toward something constructive. The world didn't need more division. It needed moments of connection, even in the most unexpected circumstances. The next morning, the quiet block in front of LA Terrace began to transform. Trucks arrived, unloading equipment as volunteers set up tables, banners, and a small stage. Barron stood at the center, overseeing everything, making sure every detail aligned. With his vision, a large banner above the stage read in bold letters, "United we stand, building bridges, not walls." He had reached out to organizations focused on community building, youth mentorship, and open dialogue. The fundraiser wasn't just about raising money. It was about creating a space where people from different backgrounds could come together. Food trucks lined the sidewalk, live music played in the background, and booths for local charities created a welcoming atmosphere. What had started as a moment of conflict was now turning into a celebration of unity. By midday, people began gathering, families, professionals, activists, and even some familiar faces from social media. Barron stepped onto the stage, his voice steady but full of emotion as he addressed the crowd. He spoke about the previous day's events, how he had been asked to leave because of a hat, and how he respected the restaurant's policies despite disagreeing with them. But more than that, he highlighted how quick people were to judge, to take sides, and to shut down conversations. He reminded everyone that division was not the answer, and that real change came from listening and understanding. As he spoke, the crowd responded with applause, their energy shifting from curiosity to genuine inspiration. He closed his speech by emphasizing that the event wasn't about him or the restaurant. It was about finding ways to build a more united community. The funds raised would go toward programs that foster dialogue and inclusion, proving that unity was stronger than division. Inside LA Terrace, the atmosphere was starkly different. The manager stood by the window, watching the event unfold. He hadn't expected Barron to respond this way, and it left him conflicted. Some of his staff had stepped outside, drawn in by the music and the energy of the crowd. A waiter who had been there the previous day returned inside, pausing before speaking softly. He suggested that the manager go outside and talk to Barron. The manager stiffened, hesitant, insisting that this wasn't his fight. But as he looked back out the window, watching more people gather, something inside him shifted. He poured himself a glass of water, his thoughts tangled with hesitation and realization. The sight outside pulled at something deep within him, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge. The manager sat in his office, staring at the screen filled with emails, cancellations, and frustrated messages. His mind replayed the events of the previous day, the firm stance he had taken, and the way Barron had walked out without resistance. At the time, he had believed he was making the right call, enforcing a policy meant to keep the restaurant neutral. But now, as he read through the words of long-time customers expressing their disappointment, doubt crept in. He had prided himself on running a space where everyone felt welcome, yet it seemed his decision had done the opposite. He glanced out the window at the growing crowd, the energy outside a stark contrast to the emptiness of the restaurant. The people outside weren't protesting or causing chaos. They were celebrating unity, something he had failed to consider in his pursuit of control. Outside, the fundraiser continued to flourish. The jazz band played an upbeat tune, children gathered around the art booth, and volunteers helped distribute food to those in need. Barron moved through the crowd with ease, engaging with people from different backgrounds, bridging gaps with simple gestures of kindness. The sense of community was undeniable, a powerful display of what acceptance and dialogue could create. Social media continued to amplify the event, turning it into a larger conversation about tolerance, respect, and the power of listening. More people arrived, drawn by the message rather than the controversy. It wasn't about politics anymore, it was about people. And as the manager watched from behind the glass, something inside him shifted. He had spent the day resisting the idea of stepping outside, but now, for the first time, he wondered if he had been shutting out something far more important. As the handshake lingered, the weight of the past day seemed to dissipate. The crowd, sensing the shift in energy, resumed their conversations, the music playing once again in the background. The manager looked around, truly taking in the scene, the families laughing, strangers connecting, and the overwhelming sense of unity that had formed in front of his restaurant. He had spent years curating an exclusive dining experience, but here, outside his own doors, was a reminder of something more meaningful. He realized now that neutrality wasn't about shutting down conversations, but fostering spaces where differences could be understood rather than silenced. Barron watched as the manager's expression softened, knowing that this moment wasn't just about an apology, it was about real change. The tension that had once defined their interaction was replaced by a mutual understanding. The idea of hosting a community event at LA Terrace felt like the perfect way to turn the past day's conflict into something productive. As the manager nodded, already considering the possibilities, Barron felt a sense of accomplishment. Not because he had won anything, but because a conversation had led to progress. The world wasn't going to change overnight, but this was proof that it could change one interaction at a time. As the sun set over the city, the fundraiser wrapped up. But the impact of the day would last far beyond the final song or speech. It had become something bigger than a hat, a restaurant, or a single decision. It had become a statement, a reminder that even in moments of division, there was always a path toward unity. As the applause faded into the warm evening air, a quiet sense of fulfillment settled over the crowd. Conversations lingered, people exchanged numbers, and friendships formed in the wake of what had started as a moment of conflict. The fundraiser had been more than just an event. It had become a symbol of what was possible when people chose dialogue over division. Barron took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the day finally lift. He had set out to make a statement, not with anger or retaliation, but with action and purpose. Looking around, he saw the faces of those who had doubted, supported, and even opposed him. Now standing together in a shared moment of understanding, he turned to leave. He caught a final glance at the manager, who stood near the restaurant doors, watching with a contemplative expression. There was no need for more words. The message had been received. The real work, the kind that extended beyond a single day, was just beginning. And for the first time in a long while, it felt like the world, or at least this small corner of it, was moving in the right direction.